evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of another live. Not just another episode, it's another live episode of The Breakdown. It is September 29th, 2024. I'm your host, Nate Pike. Oh, this week, though, Alberta Politics. Could you please get a little bit more boring? It would be great to have less subject matter to work from, because, my God, it's been a week. We're going to try to do our little rundown, and it's a bit of a mixed bag. We got some happy, we got some not happy, we got some saucy. It's going to get a little saucy towards the end for sure, and hopefully time dependent, we're going to open it up to the Twitter Spaces as well. So if you're listening along to the show or you're in the chat, you hear something that you say, maybe you agree with, maybe you disagree with, hop on the X Spaces, the Twitter Spaces, the X Twitter Spaces. See what I did there? And at the end of the show, we'll open up some space for anybody who wants to share their thoughts. We got a lot of ground to cover this week, tonight, so we're going to get right started with kind of, sort of some good news, but is kind of where it ends. So the really good news is, some of you may remember back in 2013, there was a little bit of a water problem in Calgary and in a lot of southern Alberta because we had this flooding problem. Well, the province has been looking at a couple of different ways to mitigate flooding in the future. And there were three major infrastructure projects that they were potentially looking at. They had three separate locations to build a flood mitigation reservoir that was upstream from Calgary, so would hopefully prevent most of the flooding damages downstream from these sites. Sorry, Canmore. I guess you guys are on your own, but there were three different sites they were looking at. One of them was in the town site area of Morley. One of them was expanding the Ghost Dam, and the other one was building the reservoir next to the Glenbow Ranch Provincial Park. Now, some of you this might ring a little bit of a bell for you because we had a bit of a conversation with the executive director of the Glenbow Ranch area. Foundation is probably, I should have written down the name. Jeremy Farkas. We had a conversation with him a while back because it's quite a beautiful park. It's very, very nice, beautiful chunk of natural river valley. There's all kinds of fun wildlife things. I got to go visit it. There were birds and other animals that were delightful. And had they gone ahead with that version, they would have wiped out pretty much that entire area. It would have been very, very gross, and there would have been the potential for flooding to backlog up to Cochrane, which, if you are fans of ice cream, would be very, very bad. They made the decision on Wednesday, though. They made the announcement that they're going to expand the Ghost Reservoir. So that's the big reservoir about 50 kilometers away from Calgary. It's upstream on the Bow River. And that's great because the park gets protected. The Morley option was taken off the table a while ago, but the park gets protected, so that's really good news. But and this is the part of the conversation, the slightly frustrating part of the conversation, because it turns out that not all of the appropriate stakeholders were maybe consulted right after the announcement was made. Siksika Nation was expressed quite a bit of frustration. They're the only First Nation that's downstream from this project. And so they will, in some capacity, be affected. Now, you can go back and forth on yes, but this is going to protect the area that Siksika Nation occupies. It will protect them from the flooding, because a lot of people don't know this, but Siksika got really badly hit during the floods in 2013 as well. And a lot of the media attention was on the Calgary area, but there was a lot of damages that happened there. There were a lot of homes that got destroyed. There was a lot of infrastructure that got seriously damaged as well. So it's understandable that they want to have a little bit of engagement, perhaps. They did not. They did not get any engagement. It's not great. So to read from the article on the screen here, the terms of reference lack any Western science evaluations of impacts on Siksika lands, rights, or title, said the June 2021 report from PGL Environmental Consultants. The effects of flood mitigation need to consider the consequent magnitude, volume, and timing of peak flows as they pass through Siksika land. The province promised, and this is where, because tomorrow, this is where this hurts. The promised after they got that report in 2021, they promised that they would have quarterly talks with Siksika over the water and all of the conversations around that. They were supposed to meet quarterly. They did not. They did not meet once. So this again highlights the importance of, there is a duty to consult that exists, and it's part of the truth and reconciliation conversation. And the more that colonial governments, that for a turn of phrase is probably going to make some heads explode, but the more the colonial governments decide that they're just going to go ahead and do what they want, or worse, and this is the worst part, make commitments and then fail to live up to those commitments. There's no question that the flood mitigation is important. It's critical. There's no question that protecting the Glenbow Park area is critically important. There is profound reason to be frustrated and disappointed in that promises were made to the Siksika Nation, and those promises were just, we don't want to. We're going to do what we want because it's not on nation land. We have to do better. Moving on from there, I still get to, it turns out, say the name, because when it comes down to the time that Marco van Hugenbos is getting, it turns out he gets a little more time, because there's a fascinating little development that has occurred over the last couple of days in regards to Mr. van Hugenbos, who has been, let's be clear, I'm not saying that this gets relevant for later in the show, but this definitely gets relevant for later in the show. He has been convicted. Marco van Hugenbos is at this point a convicted criminal. Marco is, of course, one of the leaders, was one of the leaders of the Coutts blockade, former town councillor for Fort Macleod. I'm sure they just love the fact that this is dragging on and on and on and on. Marco and his two other ringleaders were all found guilty for one count each of mischief over $5,000. Now, when you say it that way, it doesn't sound super bad. Mischief over $5,000. How bad can that be? Well, the maximum sentence for mischief over $5,000 is 10 years in prison. And there's been a couple of scheduling challenges that were going on. There was supposed to be a scheduling hearing. There was a scheduled hearing to schedule the sentencing. But the lawyers in this case, they're dropping like flies. Marco van Hugenbos's lawyer is no longer representing him. So he was given time to retain new counsel, find a new lawyer. And the sentencing date for Marco will now be set for October 17th. Now, that's the sentence setting the date for the sentencing. It's very confusing. Perhaps it would be best if we let Marco explain it, because he put out a tweet that explained it quite well, in which he said, earlier this morning, I had a virtual court meeting. We were unable to set a sentencing date as new counsel has not been retained. The next court date is set for October 17th. At this point, I believe in all parties will be in a position to schedule the sentencing. So they're struggling scheduling a scheduling meeting. It's starting to look like the earliest availability, words are hard tonight, to move forward will be the beginning or middle of January. So here's hoping they just forget about the matter altogether, says Marco. Good to know I will be present for Christmas with family and friends. This also confirms my in-person attendance at the UCP AGM. Sorry, folks, you can't get rid of me. that easily. Now, a lot to unpack there, because there has been, and to be clear, there's no evidence for this, but there has been some speculation that has floated around the social media machines that perhaps the reason why Marco's lawyer does not lawyer for Marco anymore was because Marco wanted to make sure that he got not just Christmas with the Fam Jam, but also got to attend the UCP AGM. Again, there's no public evidence for that. So, that's just speculation. But he's not wrong. It does likely mean that his court date will be the scheduling of the sentencing will be scheduled for likely the new year. So he will be attending, as we will be discussing later, the UCP AGM, one of the special elite that gets to attend the UCP AGM. Moving on from there, some interesting news out of Germany, of all places, because one of the things that's been going on in the last couple of weeks and months, particularly in the run-up to the UCP AGM, has been Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has been talking about the fact that she actually wants to double capacity of energy production from the province of Alberta. Now, she says she's going to manage the emissions using technology that hasn't actually been proven to work on a scalable level yet, but she's good for her word. And she's going to double the production of all of Alberta's energy exports. Except Germany said maybe not so much. In a briefing for journalists at Germany's embassy in Ottawa on Friday, Jennifer Morgan, who's the state secretary and special envoy for international climate action, warned Germany and Europe will require less natural gas from countries like Canada in the future. All studies show that the market is going to shrink, Morgan said. Germany will be driving forward on renewables and gas demand will decline. And this is where the whole conversation about, well, we're going to double Alberta's energy gets to be a little bit interesting and nuanced, because historically, when we're talking about the things that Alberta has produced for energy, have been oil and gas projects. Now, Danielle Smith has tried to pivot hard the conversation to, no, you know what, we're going to do hydrogen and other things. And there is the potential that there is a market for that. But the notion that it's going to have the same sort of boom for the economy that we have seen with booms of oil and gas in the past is at best optimistic. And especially when you take in mind that the historical hydrocarbons that Alberta has produced, a lot of places in the world are saying, well, you know what, we're not going to be, maybe we can get it cheaper somewhere else. They're also saying maybe we're not going to use that so much anymore. So Alberta's building a new economy for a new world that may or may not have very much interest in the project. And there's a lot of people who immediately pivot to the argument of, well, we will always need oil and gas products. And that's not true. It is true. There's a lot of things that you simply can't recycle. There's a lot of things that you simply have to remake new. The challenge is, as has been documented in many places before, getting those products out of the oil and gas things is more expensive to do for companies out of Alberta's resources than it is to get them out of other jurisdictions. That's the first thing that we wanted to talk about in regards to the energy stuff. We've got a couple other topics we're going to be hitting on that tonight. But before we do, we got to talk about the houselessness and the homeless situation in Edmonton, because there were some alarming stats that made it onto the headlines. The number of Edmontonians who are experiencing houselessness or homelessness has gone up in a truly stunning manner. It's risen, according to data from the city's main housing agency, which is called Homeward Trust's their by name list, counted 4,011 people who are either living unhoused or without stable housing. It marks a 47% increase in the number of people who are experiencing houselessness and homelessness in the city of Edmonton. It's up 2,728 people from January. Now, this comes at a time as well when the city of Edmonton is clearing more encampments. And this gets to be a complex conversation as well, because you can say that you've cleared an encampment, but if the numbers are any indication, they're not clearing them so much as just moving them on to somewhere else. Edmonton ramped up its encampment clearing after, it's also worth noting, afterwards, some false stories that got circulated primarily by the Premier of Alberta and the Edmonton police. So that's not a great look. But they cleared last year 2,663 encampments. This year, so far, between January 1st and September 8th, they've cleared 3,819 encampments. Now, the comment from the story that we have on the screen right now, Nadine Chalifot, chair of the Edmonton Coalition on Housing and Homelessness, believes the numbers may actually be higher. The more encampment evictions we're giving out, the more likely we're missing people, Chalifot said. Adding community members are increasingly scared to stay in one spot. If they see a cop, they've got to pack up. They're afraid they're going to get all their stuff taken away, and they have to run to find a new place to hang out. Which is why the encampment conversation is so broken, because the priority has been, let's just move these people out of sight, out of mind. And the problem with that is, without providing the appropriate resources, without providing housing, all you're doing is moving the problem around. The solution to houselessness and homelessness is in the name. People need housing and people need homes. And you can't help but wonder, if you stack up the amount of money that the province and the city of Edmonton and the city of Calgary and other places as well have spent on smearing the problem around, as opposed to actually addressing the underlying causes that, again, are in the name of the problem, we probably could have just put all of these people in houses, given all of these people homes. Because as many people who talk about the elements that do exist, not in the entire houseless and homeless population, and that's really important to highlight, but the elements that do exist for a section of the houseless and the homeless population, there are often issues of mental health stuffs. There are often issues of substance use. Those problems can't be addressed in any meaningful way until the stability and not having to worry about freezing to death as we head back into another Alberta winter are addressed. Moving on from there and swinging back into, it's a weird structure for the show tonight. I don't know what to tell you. But since we're talking about policing, kind of, the UCP have announced their candidate, their nominee for the pending, no date yet, it's still pending, by-election in Lethbridge West. Shannon Phillips resigned from the role of elected official, and with her stepping down, there's going to be a by-election at some point. And the UCP picked their candidate, John Middleton Hope, who has a fascinating biography, because he was the former Lethbridge police chief from 2002 to 2006. Now, there's a lot of people who have heard, wait a second, he was a former police chief. Is that the one that was the police chief when Shannon Phillips was being stalked by the Lethbridge police? No, different time period entirely. So you can't pin that on Mr. Middleton Hope. But he was still the chief of the Lethbridge police, and those who know there's a little bit of a chronic problem in history when it comes to, you can Google it. I don't want to I don't want to get sued this week. But this means that both major parties now have their candidates because the NDP announced a while ago that they were going to be running Rob Miyashiro. And this is where we got to see the fancy new NDP logo, the Team Nenshi logo. So many elements going on there. We got the little province of Alberta and then we got the mountains of a particular color. It's all a team. So that's something to watch for. No word again on when that by-election is going to be happening. Staying with the sort of rural urban Alberta, we're going to swing over to Red Deer for a quick sec and talk about the bait and switch that seems like is happening in Red Deer. Red Deer has had, for several years now, a supervised consumption site, and the province is changing things up a little bit. Now, the city of Red Deer said, we've elected a new town council, and we don't like these supervised consumption sites because the people, they use the drugs there. We like to have our residents use their drugs at home in completely unsupervised places. So we would like that place to go away. So the province is instead introducing a mobile rapid access addiction medicine clinic, an MRAMC, in its place. It's going to be operated by Recovery Alberta, which is the new, very badly and stigmatically named organization that is taking care of the mental health and addictions portfolio. It is going to be located in the homeless shelter parking lot. They're going to offer screening, diagnosis, referral to services, access to the virtual opioid dependency program, education, Narcan kits, and needle exchange. They're also going to be having a dynamic overdose response team, or a DORT. I mean, like, take a couple minutes, spend some time with the acronyms. You can massage them a little bit. You can get better than DORT. Of paramedics and licensed practical nurses to monitor a designated area of the Safe Harbor Shelter facility as well as the surrounding block. But there's some, again, as always is, some nuance to this conversation, because as we have received multiple DMs on, the place that we're talking about serves 600 unique individuals. They all just lost their supervised consumption site. Now, it's worth remembering when we're talking about supervised consumption sites and the statistics that exist with supervised consumption sites, no one's ever died there. No one's ever died in a supervised consumption site in Alberta. It just hasn't happened because they exist to keep people from dying. And now those 600 people, 600 unique people, will no longer have that space where they can use, where the relationships can be built so that they can hopefully get to a place where they will be able to accept some services. But one of the biggest advantages and one of the biggest strengths, after just keeping people alive, which is the biggest one, to be clear, but one of the biggest strengths of a supervised consumption site is that it allows those relationships to be built. It allows trust to be built. Now, just handing out Narcan kits is not going to have that same level of trust built. But on top of that, from the DM that we received, the RNs and paramedics there just lost their jobs. They had to transfer from AHS to Recovery Alberta, and in the process, lost their seniority with AHS. Now, as of April 2025, they don't have this job anymore. Something like 25 full-time and 22 part-time positions. And we wonder why we have such a hard time finding healthcare workers in this province. But continuing on with the healthcare theme, we got to talk about Rocky Mountain House for a little bit, because this is one of a couple of dust-ups that happened in healthcare this week. So for anyone who's unfamiliar, there's a group of physicians that are trying to ensure that the operating room and the surgical services that they offer stay in place. They wrote a whole letter to the province over it, where they talked about the fact that they had a general surgical program for decades. These services are in serious jeopardy. Now, this is signed by a boatload of physicians who serve the area of Rocky Mountain House. The concern is over the last 10 years, we've had multiple surgeons who have wanted to serve our community with their skills, but have faced roadblocks preventing them from working to their full capacity. AHS Central Zone Medical Affairs has consistently created obstacles. Without fail, our previous surgeons have all moved on to other areas in Alberta or other provinces where they've been allowed to work instead of being hindered at every step. And there's a paragraph in particular we just want to spend a quick second highlighting because it is really, really important. Our beautiful new operating room, a multi-million-dollar project that was so generously donated towards by the community. So to be clear, the community raised a lot of the funds to make sure that this operating room became a thing so that there was the general surgery availability. It's potentially going to be taken over by orthopedic surgeries. These are much needed procedures for Albertans. However, instead of orthopedics coexisting with our established general surgery program, AHS has significantly limited access to the operating room by our local general surgeon. As a result, Dr. Topstad, our current surgeon, has given her resignation to AHS. So they had a surgeon in Rocky Mountain House. The surgeon wanted to do the surgeries, and there were roadblocks put in their way, and the surgeon said, peace, I'm out. Any rural general surgeon who considers applying to the position for Rocky is going to have substantially less than usual access to the operating room, making this an unappealing job prospect. So again, and this is where it's important to highlight the signatures at the end of the letter, because there are a boatload of docs who have signed the bottom of this letter saying this is a very real problem here. This is something that we're very, very concerned about. And one of the goals, one of the things that Danielle Smith has said repeatedly is, hey, we've got these operating rooms. Maybe we could use some of them for surgical sites for orthopedics. Maybe we could send people to Rocky Mountain House for orthopedic surgeries. Maybe we could do that. And as the letter from the physician's notes, we got a bit of a backlog on our orthopedic surgeries in Alberta. So yes, people do need these procedures. There's no question about that. People should be able to access timely orthopedic surgeries. But that doesn't mean that a community should lose its access to its general surgeries, because if it does, that means that they're then going to have to go somewhere that has the general surgery rotation and services available. AHS responded, and we would be remiss if we did not highlight that response. HS President and CEO Athana Mentezopoulos, I'm so sorry, I take full responsibility for the pronunciation on that, has issued a media statement providing clarity on the future of the surgical program in Rocky Mountain House. There are absolutely no plans to reduce general surgeries. AHS continues to support the site's surgery program, approximately 81 general surgeries, 412 endoscopies, which covers a number of different procedures, and 52 gynecological procedures were completed this year. In June, we expanded the surgical program to include knee replacement surgeries, and 41 ortho surgeries have been done. The addition of ortho surgeries has bolstered the surgery program, not hampered it. Other claims regarding impacts on acute beds and the number of physicians in the community are not true. Read the full statement here. And then they provided a link to the full statement. So, okay, now we have two conflicting stories. And I suppose that it would be incumbent of the average Albertan, the listener, the Rocky Mountain Hoosian. That's what I'm going with. I'm going to get some DMs. But the question that the average Rocky Mountain Hoosian needs to ask themselves is, who do I believe? The almost a dozen physicians who signed the bottom of that letter, or the CEO who has been instructed to do the things? Because the reality is 41 procedures, orthotic procedures, orthopedic procedures, probably not orthotic, maybe, I don't know. Orthopedic surgeries since June is not a small number. And it's a very different set of skills and tools to do orthopedic surgeries as it is to do general surgeries. So there's some questions that media statement maybe didn't resolve. And it certainly didn't address the fact that you're talking about a group of physicians that are serving in a rural environment. Maybe their concerns have some validity too. Not saying Just saying. Moving on from there, we gotta talk about the Adriana LaGrange had a rough week. To say the least, Adriana LaGrange had a bit of a rough week. So to get into the Adriana LaGrange's very bad week, we have to set the stage right. And in order to set the stage right, we kind of have to talk about the Bill of Rights thing that's been going on, because there's been some Bill of Rights stuff that's been happening. Danielle Smith had a surprise announcement where she announced in a few weeks' time our UCP government will be introducing legislation to amend and strengthen the Alberta Rights, a document that has stood as a safeguard for our civil liberties and freedoms for decades. These changes are a reaffirmation of the values that make Alberta one of the freest jurisdictions on earth. They're about protecting our rights, our freedoms, and our way of life. Yada, yada, yada. We're going to go through the whole thing, but there was one particular section that stuck out for a bunch of people. We're not going to play the whole 3.5 minute video, but there's one section that we do want to draw attention to because it addresses one of the biggest questions that people have been asking about. How are you going to square medical autonomy with taking away treatment options for people suffering from gender dysphoria and forcing people into addictions treatment against their will and their charter rights?
We are making to the Bill of Rights is to reinforce the right of every Albertan to make their own choices regarding the medical treatments they receive. This includes ensuring that every individual in our province who has the mental capacity to do so will have the right to decide whether or not to receive a vaccination or other medical procedure. In recent years, we've seen the challenges and hardship that can arise when that right to bodily autonomy is not adequately protected. It is my firm conviction that no Albertan should ever be subjected or pressured into accepting a medical treatment without their full consent. For me, this addition to the Bill of Rights is about recognizing that in Alberta, we believe that individuals have the right to make informed decisions about their own bodies without fear of undue pressure or interference by government.
So it's a vaccine dog whistle, but the phrase that's important in that whole dog whistle celebration is the mental capacity to do so. And this is where things stand to get real complicated real fast, because the argument that Danielle Smith appears to be making with this new addition to the Bill of Rights in Alberta, which only has limited jurisdictional places anyways. But the argument that Danielle Smith appears to be making is that, hey, if we think that you have the mental capacity to say no to vaccines and you work in a nursing home, we're just going to say, hey, you know what? You're allowed to work in the nursing home. And if you kill a bunch of seniors because you haven't taken the appropriate precautions, that's okay. Nobody can force you to do something medically that you don't want to do. And this is where the lines really begin to blur, because historically, when we're talking about who determines capacity, capacity is not determined by demographic. It's not determined by the type of medical condition that a person has. It's determined on an individual basis using individual assessments. Now, those capacity determinations, because they literally do have the potential to revoke a person's charter rights, are conducted by somebody trained to make that determination. And in our society, that's limited to physicians and judges and peace officers and police officers for a very, very, very narrow period of time. But it's a very, very important power because it is so specific to every individual. So to say, you know what, we're going to say, if you want to use the drugs, I don't like that. Therefore, I'm going to say that you lack capacity because I disagree with your choices, goes down a very dangerous road. Now, this is also a road that Danielle Smith has said in public, on the record, that this is something that she will consider using the notwithstanding clause in order to revoke people's charter rights. And if you're making legislation that says, hey, you know what? We think that if you've overdosed X number of times, whatever that arbitrary made up number is, then we can force you to accept treatment, then you're breaking some rules. You're breaking the charter. And this is why Danielle Smith has said that she'll use the notwithstanding clause if she has to. But the other place that it gets complicated, or to any reasonable thinking person, it should appear complicated, is where Smith has said that she's going to insert herself into the medical clinics of physicians who are treating gender dysphoria across the province. Because Danielle Smith is saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to determine whether or not your child has competency, which is, again, a medical determination that Danielle Smith and nobody in the UCP caucus or cabinet, for that matter, have the qualifications to make that determination for. But they're also saying to parents, if you want to provide gender affirming care for your kid, we don't believe that you are competent. We don't believe that you're competent to make those decisions. We'll let you make decisions if it comes to managing diabetes or cancer or autoimmune disorders or anything that could be immediately life-threatening to your child or have long-term implications. But this thing, it turns out there's some folks that it makes uncomfortable. So we're just going to say, nah, you don't get to weigh in on that one, moms and dads across the province. So that's the announcement that came out on the 24th. And Adriana LaGrange, you almost have to feel sorry for her, because the very next day she had herself a press conference, and you can imagine what one of the first questions that she was asked was.
Related to the right to bodily autonomy that was mentioned in yesterday's Bill of Rights amendment. There's been a lot of confusion as to what is meant by that. I'm hoping you can give some examples and explain at what point were any Albertans ever forcibly told they had to get a vaccination or medical treatment. We understand companies and local businesses had vaccine mandates which were detrimental to those who made their conscious and rightful decision not to get the COVID vaccine. But when was bodily autonomy ever not a right? And what medical procedure is your government referring to in regards to not having the choice to receive that? Is there any age limit to bodily autonomy as well?
Well, thank you for the question. And really what the aim of the new bill is to strengthen the rights and freedoms of Albertans. We heard very clearly through the Manning report. Mr. Manning went across the province. He did a lot of extensive engagement, listening to everyday Albertans and their experience, particularly through the pandemic, but obviously they were interested in sharing other thoughts as well. And what he heard and what he was able to share through the report is that Albertans want to have the rights that they already have enshrined to be even further strengthened. And so that's what this bill will come forward with, and happy as we table it in the fall here to show you the details of that.
Any examples, though, of bodily autonomy not being implemented here?
Well, again, I would rather just wait till we have the bill in front of you, and then you can actually see the wording of the bill, because you will see it is very much about strengthening the overall rights and freedoms of Albertans.
So no examples.
That reporter's just wins everything right now for me, as far as I'm concerned. But what are the changes that Danielle Smith is making to the Bill of Rights? Well, she highlighted them in her little video. So the first one is, and this has to do with the vaccinations piece, every Albertan will have the right over their vaccinations and any medical decisions. Okay. Number 2, no Albertan shall be deprived of their property without legal due process and just compensation. which brings us to number 3, defend the rights of all legal and responsible firearms owners. So this is the 3 big changes that Danielle Smith has publicly said she's going to be implementing with the new Bill of Rights. Now, it's complicated and it's fraught because many people have pointed out, well, hey, isn't number 2 and number 3 kind of just the same thing? Because we all know that Danny was very, very unhappy during the floods that we talked about earlier when RCMP officers secured the firearms of people who had to abandon their homes. And that was the great gun grab, as Danny liked to call it. So is this just saying, hey, in case of natural disaster, we'd much rather like to leave the guns laying out for anybody who wants to go get them? Or is this something else? But it's also important to highlight that when she talks about the rights of lawful gun owners, again, we're doing a bit of a dog whistle here, because if you're talking about defending the rights of all legal and responsible firearm owners, first of all, we live in Canada. We don't live in the United States. Nowhere in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is firearms ownership a right. In Canada, firearms ownership is a privilege. And that's a really important thing to highlight. And this is, again, one of the pieces of the Americanization of Canadian and especially Albertan culture, because there's a lot of people who have this misconception that we have the right to bear arms in Alberta or Canada. We absolutely don't. Firearms ownership is a privilege. It's a privilege that is earned by getting a license, no different than the privilege of driving a vehicle. And if you demonstrate that you're not willing to do the work of getting that license, then no, you shouldn't have a firearm. If you demonstrate that you're going to use that firearm irresponsibly, then no, you shouldn't have that firearm. If you demonstrate that you're a risk to the people around you, then no, you shouldn't have that firearm. These are the very basic principles that so many in the United States are desperately pleading for. Because if you just say, no, you've got a right to guns and junk, then you open yourself up to the kind of gun culture that exists and all of the tragic consequences that we see play out on a nearly daily basis in the United States of America. It's also really important to highlight that when we talk about firearms ownership, the province has almost no say on how that plays out. And in fact, it's federal jurisdiction. So again, we have another fine example of Danielle Smith saying, whoa, Ottawa, stay in your lane. Oh, federal government, stay in your lane because I'm going to come over and drive in it now. That's exactly what she's doing with this. Firearms ownership and firearms regulation is a federal jurisdiction, period. Danielle Smith, including this in the Bill of Rights, is not only a wasted exercise, but it's also encroaching on federal jurisdiction. And we're going to talk about all the crafty little ways that Danielle Smith has been pursuing encroaching on federal jurisdiction. But we wanted to talk about the Bill of Rights thing for a sec because there's been a lot of confusion. And the reason for that is there's at least 3 reported on versions of the Bill of Rights that we've seen in circulation. We saw the version that LifeSite News, the Catholic, some people have called it a hate website. Do with that what you will. Reported on where they said they heard from a highly placed insider inside of the UCP, as well as an MLA, a UCP MLA, who confirmed to them that there were going to be provisions in the new Bill of Rights that tried to outlaw abortion. Now, Danielle Smith has since come out and very clearly said, no, we're not going to do that. So there's that version. Then we have the UCP's own version, which again appears not to be the version that Danny's talking about here, because the UCP Bill of Rights, and this is not conspiracy theory. I think this is really important to highlight. This is not conspiracy theory. These graphics were taken from an email that was sent out by the president of the UCP. And this new Bill of Rights that comes color-coded is one that has been updated and had a boatload of things added to it by the Black Hat gang, which I shouldn't. The things that you have to say when you're talking about Alberta politics these days. So yeah, the Black Hat Gang, which is this group of like kind of biggity folks from the southern Alberta, they said, hey, you know what? We don't have any real constitutional law experience, but we really like how the United States has structured their Bill of Rights. So we're gonna do up a document. We're gonna give that to the UCP board, and then the UCP board literally, and I'm not making this up, voted unanimously to endorse it as the Bill of Rights that the government should go ahead with. But that's a different version, by most accounts, than what the UCP are actually going to be introducing in the legislature. So there's all of these different bills of rights that exist that are making the conversation very confusing for a lot of people. But there's at least the three. There's the LifeSite News. There's the UCP Party Bill of Rights that's going to be voted on at their upcoming AGM, and then there's the actual legislation and amendments to the actual law that the UCP are going to be introducing in the next legislative session. But let's get back to Adriana LaGrange's very bad day. Because it wasn't just the autonomy piece that she was asked about. She got hit with a bunch of questions. And a lot of those questions became very relevant to the rest of Alberta politics throughout the week. And one of the biggest ones has to be the questions around the pay for healthcare workers. And how do we keep healthcare workers in the province of Alberta? We'll do the physician one first, because that's been a long-standing issue. We've had Dr. Paul Parks on the show, and he's talked about the fact that there was an agreement that was put together between the Alberta Medical Association and the government of Alberta, where they had this whole new pay structure. Adriana LaGrange did a press conference, and Danielle Smith was there, and they were like, oh, this thing's the best thing ever. We're going to get it rolled out. It's going to be fantastic. That was like a year ago, and it hasn't happened yet. So that came up at the presser.
And our new president, Dr. Duggan, they both said that like the holdup is actually on the Treasury Board side, and you're saying that's not the case, and you know you still have your processes to work through. Can you just explain what those processes are like? And essentially, I want to know what like the workload is like. Is this what you're working on every day? Like, what's the urgency here?
Well, as I indicated before, we are working faster than the speed of government to get this completed and put through. While Treasury Board is one of the processes that I need to go through, there are others that, you know, I just need to go through. So while I can appreciate that Dr. Parks and Dr. Duggan really are there advocating for their members, and that's what the association should do, and they continue to do. I have to look at the whole system and make sure that it fits within the whole system. I need to make sure, as I said earlier, that it's financially sustainable, not just now, but for years to come from now. I have to make sure that it is going to be successful, as I gave the example earlier, just in my last response, on programs that we've put in place that actually didn't get the buy-in from the different groups. So that is what we are doing right now, making sure that we've done our due diligence, and I am looking forward to announcing this as soon as possible.
I guess for a follow-up, I'm just going to kind of focus on like the sustainability concerns there. Like, is the concern like overall spending amount? Is it? Yeah, can you just explain that a bit and expand on that?
Well, I'll give you an example, a tangible example. So in 22-23, the overall physician compensation model, at that time, I believe there was roughly about 500 physicians, was $5.2 billion. In 23-24, that was $5.9 billion overall for the physician compensation model. And in 24-25, this current year, it's now $6.7 billion. It's growing faster than inflation and population. And so I have to make sure that I'm able to balance all of those pieces out. And as I said earlier, now we're at approximately 11,700 physicians at $6.7 billion, and I can tell you it is crept beyond that because it's growing. It's above budget at the moment. I know that we want our doctors to be well compensated for the work that they're doing, but I know that if this budget was a ministry in the government, it would be the third largest ministry in all of government, next to health and education in our province. So I have to make sure that as this budget grows, that I have the means to continue it on for future. So again, while we're moving through this process, one of the pieces is sustainability. So so that you understand my challenges too. I have budgetary challenges that I need to make sure that I can address. But we are absolutely committed to getting this done. And I don't want anyone to think that we're not. We're absolutely committed to this. I just have some processes I need to go through.
I love that was a long clip, I know, but it's worth listening to the whole thing because you can hear the moments, you can hear the beats where she's going, oh, what was that talking point that I was supposed to use for this question? I can't remember what it was. I better keep using words. Oh yeah, that was the thing I was supposed to say. That if it was a ministry, if the budget was, it would be a whole ministry thing. And she bounces back and forth between those talking points. So that's a whole lot of fun going on there. But the two main things that are expressed in that clip seem to be, first of all, the doctors, they make so much, they're so expensive. What are you gonna do? And then the second one seems to be, well, I have these processes that I have to go through that are slowing me down. Just really want to let that marinate with you for a second. The biggest thing that's holding it up is the processes. But it's also worth noting that it wasn't just physicians' pay and physicians' compensation that came up. There were also questions about why are nurses leaving the profession at the rate that they are.
Nearly half of all new nurses in Alberta are leaving the profession before the age of 35. Why do you think that is, and what is the province doing about it?
And I think that refers to CIHI data that came out, or data that came out in Quebec just yesterday, or the day before, and it's showing that we're about middle of the pack in terms of where all, in comparison to other provinces. That's happening right across Canada. I know that when I spoke and have gone across the province, we did 65 in-person sessions across the province, as well as numerous telephone town halls, etc., in our engagement on the refocusing. When I speak with nurses, they feel that sometimes they're not prepared, particularly the younger nurses as they come out of post-secondary. So I think there's conversations that need to be had on the post-secondary side. How can we better prepare them for the work that they're going to be facing? That also is a time period when they have young families, and so how do we look at schedules that might accommodate their lifestyle and where they want to be? And in general, how do we provide better supports to nurses, looking at even the mentorship, so that they have that mentorship as they come out of post-secondary and are ready to go into the workforce. So there's many strategies we're looking at. But I would just say that we've been very successful in attracting nurses to Alberta, and my understanding is that this year that the graduates that are coming out of post-secondary are, for the most part, staying in Alberta. So we want to make sure that they stay with us for the long term. We need them.
And what would you estimate a time frame on looking into this?
We've been actively looking into this, and we're actively looking at strategies on how we can make further improvements and further enhancements on what's currently happening. So it's an ongoing conversation. It's not, we're going to start in a week's time or et cetera. We've been doing this all along, and we're going to continue to do it and even enhance it even further.
Now, again, There's a lot of words that happened in that answer. But the two big things that she got it almost half right. It's maybe she should have read the report in question. Because we did. But when we're taking a look at what she talks about there, the first thing, one of the things she says is, hey, you know what? It's the work-life balance. Everybody wants to have the work-life balance. And these young ladies, they're having the kids. Not entirely wrong. But the pivot to, these nurses, they're getting out of school and they're so not prepared for the real world. They don't feel like they're prepared for the real world. Let's be clear about a few things here, because this is important to highlight. There are certain things, anybody who has worked in healthcare for any length of time will tell you that there are certain things that no amount of preparation will prepare you for the experience of actually experiencing it. There's no amount of preparation that you can do that is going to have you totally confident and ready for every situation that you're going to encounter. It's not a thing. You have to do the things in order to get good at the things. And when we talk about the many different types of situations that nurses can encounter in all of the different areas that nurses practice in, there's no amount of post-secondary is going to get you there. So that's just the reality of the things. That's something that everybody who gets into healthcare knows. The first time that you do X, it's going to be scary. But middle of the pack is a bit of a generous interpretation. Here's the actual data. So when we take a look at the data that was in the survey that's being referred to here, middle of the pack is, we're fourth from the bottom. So I guess if you say first place is the front of the pack and last place is the back of the pack, I guess you could say we're kind of in the middle. But when you take a look at the areas, first of all, Maritimes, what are y'all doing to your nurses out there? Because the Maritimes have some of the worst numbers. When we take a look at the numbers that exist for the number of nurses that are getting into the profession and leaving, the Maritimes are catastrophically bad. We're in that bucket. When you take a look at the prairie provinces, most of the prairie provinces are actually getting better. Manitoba is the number one profession for having young nurses enter the profession and stay. Only 29.4%, or 3 nurses out of every 10, leave. And they've been not doing great. They've gone up a little bit. So historically, Manitoba was quite good. British Columbia, 31.5, so 3 out of 10. And they've actually made a huge improvement on that because they've dropped that number since 2013 by 32%. Ontario, 35.1%, so 3.5 out of 10. Saskatchewan, 35.4. Quebec, 43.1. Prince Edward Island, 44.5. Then we finally get to Alberta. And you might have noticed we were able to do all of Western Canada, the biggest geographies in Eastern Canada, before we came back to Alberta. Alberta sitting at 47.7%, a decrease, a worsening of the situation by 39%. That is unbelievably bad and not at all comparable to any of the other Western Canadian provinces or prairie provinces. We are wildly, wildly behind when it comes to Western Canadian provinces and prairie provinces in regards to keeping nurses here. And if LaGrange had actually read the report or been appropriately briefed on the report was quite clear. Like a whole heading with capital letters. Why are nurses leaving? From the report, nurses are leaving for multiple reasons that include the first one, insufficient remuneration. That would be pay. Stressful work environments, overwork, and problems with work-life balance, just to mention a few. One of the biggest things that the report took away is that all of the reasons why nurses were leaving were related to undesirable working conditions. Critical issue that, according to the available evidence, affects nurses all across the country. It just really, really affects nurses in Alberta. So it's not so much that they're getting into the job unprepared, unless the argument that LaGrange is making is nurses are getting into the job and they have expectations to work in an environment that's not toxic, where they're not prepared to deal with how unappreciated they're going to be. They're not prepared to deal with the stressful work environments, the insufficient pay, the overwork. If we just had post-secondary institutions prepare them better for how terrible the job is going to be, maybe they'd stay. That seems to be the only argument that you can pull out of the many words that LaGrange threw down there. But there were a couple of other sections of the press conference that we just wanted to spend a couple minutes on before we move to our next topic. Because one of the big questions that has been going on in the province of Alberta as we head into respiratory virus season, we're already seeing that COVID is killing in the province of Alberta on average of about a person a day. So that's not great when RSV and the flu aren't. There's a lot of people saying, "Hey, where's the vaccines? What's the deal with the vaccines?" And I'm gonna prepare you for the clip because the question comes up: "Hey, when are we gonna get the vaccines? What's the deal with the vaccines?" The lengths that the health minister goes to not say the C word in her response are really quite something to behold.
We are awaiting Health Canada confirming that they have approved all of the vaccines. I do believe that we saw progress in the last few weeks. And as soon as they are announced, obviously Health Canada, the federal government, procures the vaccines and then makes them available to us. We still anticipate being on target for October 15th. For the flu and other vaccines, the respiratory vaccines, to be in Alberta. And we will be communicating more on that very, very soon.
It's going to be interesting to see how it's communicated because, as was widely reported, the government of Alberta actually reached into the communications around the vaccines for the flu and for COVID. It's not that hard of a word. It just kind of rolls off the tongue in a way. The government actually interfered with the advertising campaign to downplay the COVID piece, even though, as I said, when you take a look at the provincial dashboard, who's dying from what? People are dying from COVID. But we're not gonna say the C word, especially not before, I presume, the UCP AGM. But where it got really fun was when the question of some of the UCP policies that are going to be debated at the upcoming UCP AGM, in particular around language into late-term abortions, not a thing. Before we play the clip, we just want to put into context. In the 80s, Adriana LaGrange was president of Red Deer Pro-Life. By 2007, there's a really great article on the Sprawl did on this, by the way. You should totally check it out. But in 2007, she was also on the board of directors for Alberta Pro-Life. When it comes to MLAs and cabinet ministers who are staunchly pro-life, staunchly anti-abortion, staunchly anti-women's rights to access reproductive health care. Maybe she gets beat out by Dan Williams, but that would be a fascinating race to watch. That is some important context to have in mind as we listen to this exchange.
At the upcoming UCP AGM, which could include restricting late-term abortion funding unless the mother's physical health is in jeopardy. How often is late-term abortion happening when the mother's life is not in danger? How often is late-term abortion happening at all?
My understanding that we do provide abortions in Alberta. They're federally legislated and legal, and that late-term abortions are not performed in Alberta per se unless there is a risk to the mother. Typically, abortions are performed somewhere between the 12th and 20th week. But again, I'm not a clinician, but I do know there are clinics in Alberta that do perform abortions and will continue to do so as per the law of the land.
It is wild how quickly the UCP, when it comes to questions of vaccines, when it comes to questions of abortions, one of the quickest lines that you'll hear UCP MLAs and ministers roll out is, whoa, 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 I'm not a clinician, bro. I don't, that's a clinically sounding question. I don't know about that. They'll throw that out. But as soon as you want to talk about, forcing people into a treatment for addiction or removing people suffering from gender dysphoria, removing access to care for them, all of a sudden that gets real quiet. Moving on from there, we got to talk about Danielle Smith had a very busy week. And one of the appearances that she made in the week was at a Muslim school in Edmonton. And we've talked about this a couple of times on the show before because Danielle Smith has made some pretty big promises to the Muslim community, particularly in around holidays and in around the subject of halal mortgages. It's really important to be clear that when we're talking about halal mortgages, they're already a thing. They're a thing. There's no regulatory barriers that need to be removed. And it's also really important to highlight, again, that the only levers that Danielle Smith could pull in regards to making halal mortgages more accessible that are in her sphere of influence would be to direct the Alberta Treasury branch to force some of their portfolio to be compliant with Sharia law. It's really the only mechanism that she has. So what did she have to say this week on the topic of halal mortgages?
Initiative is currently underway is exploring the idea of a rent-to-own financing model for purchasing homes in your province. And this is an idea that was spearheaded by members of your community to make sure that these mortgages are compliant with the tenets of your faith. As of right now, our government is collaborating with the Alberta Council of Imams to make an alternative financing model available to families of Islamic faith looking to purchase a home. By expanding access to these kinds of financing options, we're seeking to provide a pathway to all Albertans while respecting their religious rights and beliefs. And I look forward to providing updates about this soon, very likely before the end of the year. Since making this announcement, other governments, including the Government of Canada, have announced that they too will be looking at these options. But let me know that this idea started right here in Edmonton, proving that, once again, Alberta is a leader in this domain. Successful Alberta could actually become the first province in Canada to officially provide alternative finance models, reflecting our government's ongoing commitment to building a strong and inclusive Alberta, where individuals from all backgrounds can participate in our freedom and prosperity.
Now, as always, there's a lot to unpack in that little clip there. And the reason why there's so much to unpack in that little clip comes down to two basic things. First of all, Danielle Smith very easily could have she made these promises a year ago. So she could very easily have, if she was going to pursue putting in changes with Alberta Treasury branch to make sure that part of their investment portfolio was compliant with Sharia law, she could have done that. But she hasn't yet. And the reason why she hasn't yet, many speculate, is because of the UCP AGM. Because if she was to actually come out and direct Alberta Treasury branches, a crown corporation, to create an investment portfolio that is only Sharia compliant, there's no question that there's members of her base that would light their hair on fire. So she's not going to do it. We'll have an update at the end of the year, she says. But it's really important to listen to the language there because Alberta would become the first province to offer this portfolio. And that seems to reinforce the notion that, yes, if Danielle Smith is going to make any changes to making sure that there are additional options, meddling with the free market, the libertarian is, there are additional options for halal mortgages. It will come through Crown corporations. It will come through Alberta Treasury branch, which, again, a lot of her supporters would light their hair on fire for. And I want to be really clear. I am not, nor is anyone at the show saying, hey, you know what? There shouldn't be halal mortgages. There absolutely should be halal mortgages. There absolutely are halal mortgages. Nobody here at the show has any problem with that. The question comes is if we're going to be, as a province, subsidizing mortgages, making sure that the money that is involved with those mortgages and the investment income that comes and goes from those mortgages is Sharia compliant or compliant with Muslim law, why are we doing it for every faith? And is it the responsibility of government to provide loans that are based on fees or anything else when the free market is already doing it? Because as some people would say, it's a cynical attempt to score points for votes heading into the election and now heading into the UCP AGM. But she did make it clear that she was breaking one of her promises that she made to Muslims.
On the issue of allowing individuals to be able to have their own religious holidays off, you saw that I think Edmonton has gone down this pathway in their collective bargaining. And we have that as an active government conversation in our collective bargaining. So we want to send a signal as a province of Alberta that we want to have the religious holidays of each faith community respected. So we'll look forward to seeing as we go through that process. But we think that by taking that leadership role, that we'll be able to encourage all of Alberta's businesses to do the same.
So Danielle Smith is saying, rather than use her pen to declare an Islamic holiday, she's going to rely I can't even get through it all the way because it's so ridiculous. Danielle Smith is going to rely on the unions and collective bargaining to make sure that the unions are the ones who are advocating for Islamic holidays. Just let that sit for a moment as we move on to our next subject, because it was also the municipalities had their big get together. They had their big conference. And one of the motions that came up, there was a resolution from the city of St. Albert that said, hey, we should all vote on whether or not we want to allow electronic tabulators in elections. Now, this is painfully simple, but it's also something that's been painfully misrepresented. There is a world of difference between electronic voting machines and electronic vote counting machines. You see, if you're using an electronic voting machine and there's no paper ballots, then there's no paper ballots. You're voting on the internet for all intents and purposes. That is a very different thing than casting a paper ballot, Scantron style with the pencil, and you got to do the little finger on the circle and all of that. That is very different than casting the paper ballot and then having a machine do the preliminary count of those ballots to ensure that there's timely results for getting all those votes counted so that people know, hey, this is who won on the night of the election. Now, of course, every system has its weaknesses, but again, vote tabulators don't get rid of paper voting. This is critically important to understand. And this is something that's been misrepresented by certain folks whose last name maybe rhymes with Barker, who's unfortunately apparently coming back to Alberta soon. This has been conflated. They've conflated the electronic voting machines with the tabulators. Now, it's also worth noting that there was a big lawsuit in the States in regards to, those Dominion voting machines, they're so terrible. And now Tucker Carlson doesn't have a job with Fox News anymore because they were completely unfounded accusations. Totally separate topic, though, because when we're talking about electronic tabulators, we're talking about the electronic machines that count the votes, the paper votes that everybody still casts. So the municipalities have said, hey, we would really like to continue to use those machines, please, because they save us a lot of money. How much money are we talking about? Edmonton has said it's going to cost $2.6 million to revert to hand counting, because you have to pay the people to count the votes. People don't just do it for free. You also have to have security measures in place to make sure that people are counting the votes properly. Red Deer has estimated it's going to cost more than 3 times the amount of past elections to count extra staff or to hire extra staff. And Calgary says it's going to cost at least $1.3 million to put in the new rules. So St. Albert put forward their proposal and said, hey, what if maybe we said to the government, we'd really like to use these machines, please, because they will save us so much money. And when we're talking about just between those 3 cities, the better part of $5 million, there's a lot of roads and potholes and, I don't know, water pipes that you could make a dent in with that kind of money. So the tabulators piece is important. And in fact, if we go back to Danielle Smith of yesteryear, she was asked this question, and back then she appeared to have a fairly basic understanding of how the things worked. We're going to go all the way back to April 3rd, 2023.
Some concern about it, but I have confirmed through department officials that all of the votes on election day will be hand counted. My understanding of how these voting machines work is that it is a paper ballot, and even though the tabulation takes place electronically, we retain a paper ballot so that if there is any issue of needing to do a recount, we'll be able to go back to the paper ballots to do that. So I've asked my my department officials to look into it again, just to make sure that there aren't any concerns. And they've come back to me and told me that that the hand count will take place the day of, and that we will retain paper copies in the event that there is any issue that needs to require a recount.
Just as a follow-up here, I mean, we've all seen what happened in the U.S. presidential election, where millions of Americans, doubt the legitimacy of their election results. Considering that a lot of Albertans do have problems with tabulators, would it be better just simply not to use them and to count all the ballots by hand, including those in the advanced polls?
I've used Scantron machines before, where you have a paper ballot and then it goes through and it's electronically tabulated. And I've also witnessed, even in my home town of High River, they had to do that very same night, a hand count, because it was so close. So I have confidence that because we have the ability to do a hand count as a follow-up in the event there are close results, that I believe that that's going to be sufficient. I think that the issue in the United States was that there are machines where you don't also have a paper tabulator. My understanding is that we're going to retain both, so that we are always able to make sure that we can do a secondary count if the count is close. That's, I think, something that people expect of democracy, that you should be able to verify a vote if results end up very close.
Now, not a terrible answer from the Premier of Alberta. Anybody recognize the voice, though? The voice that asked the question? That was Rachel Parker. That's David Parker's wife. She was there with True North, and she was pushing that narrative for the fringe base that apparently nobody has tried to explain the difference between voting machines and tabulators. She was pushing that narrative that but people are afraid of the things, rather than educate them and explain to them. As to Premier Smith's credit there, she did a pretty good job of doing. That was Rachel Parker. And it's also worth noting that there is, and we've covered this on shows before. I don't have the graphics up. We can find them if anybody really wants to see them. But it's also worth noting that there are conversations in the Take Back Alberta Telegram group that very, very clearly showed that David Parker and his wife, Rachel Parker, were coordinating their messaging around the voting counting machines, not the voting machines, the voting counting machines. So there was a whole bunch of manipulation that was going on. But a year ago, in April, Danielle Smith, clear understanding. Hey, what did Danny have to say this weekend?
It's just, did things get better or worse when we moved away from paper ballots? And they got worse. Were we able to validate close races better or worse? Well, it got worse. I mean, you don't make a decision that makes things progressively worse and then not sort of revisit the original decision. So they blew it. And because they blew it, people are wanting to go back to paper ballots. So that's what we're going to do.
Which brings us to our first example of, I can legally say this, Danielle Smith lies. Because anybody who cast a vote in the last provincial election knows you cast votes using paper ballots. But there's Danielle Smith on your province, your premier, saying, oh, we moved away from the paper ballots. No, we didn't. And people lost faith in the system because of the not having the paper ballots. We've always had paper ballots. That's Danielle Smith straight up lying to her entire audience and going, I would add, unchallenged by the host of that program. But that was the only comment that Danielle Smith made at the Alberta municipalities that got her in a little bit of trouble, because she also went after the RCMP. She made some claims that, the RCMP, they just can't keep their people staffed. They can't get it together. That's why we're bringing in the sheriffs. And the RCMP actually responded directly all over the social medias, clarifying, and this is a quote, despite continuous communications with our provincial partners, the current strength of Alberta RCMP officers is regularly miscommunicated, as is our current vacancy rate in provincial policing, which is a very, very generous way of saying they're using imprecise language. They're lying. That's all. They're lying and they're wrong. Which brings us to yesterday. I know it's been like an hour and change getting here, but here we are at yesterday already, because we had another episode of Your Province, Your Premier, where they absolutely don't screen the questions because absolutely nobody asked about the UCP membership thing that we're going to talk about in just a couple minutes here. But there were some big moments that came out of the Your Province, Your Premier this time around. And one of them absolutely has to do with the conversation around the RCMP and around the sheriffs.
Sheriffs and the numbers, the RCMP having some issue with the numbers that you quoted. Your response to that? I mean, they're saying that, I think you said it was 1,900 RCMP with 400 vacancies, something like that. And they said, no, it's 1,700 and 324 or whatever the numbers were. What's the reason for the discrepancy?
Well, they do have folks who are on leave. So we've got vacancies because they haven't been able to fill them. And then we've got vacancies because we've got people on leave for various reasons. And in typical practice, when somebody goes on leave, you find a temporary replacement for them. So we still have 400 vacancies, regardless of the reason why those aren't being filled, and that's a problem. And so what we know and what we heard when we did our rural consultation is people don't care what color of uniform an officer is wearing when they show up, whether it's a municipal officer or a sheriff or an RCMP officer. They just want someone to show up when they call. And it's quite clear to us that the RCMP is having recruitment troubles, and so we are continuing to offer to municipalities research grants so that they can see if they want to shore up their policing services a different way. Grand Prairie took us up on that, and they're shifting from a RCMP to a local municipal force, just like Calgary and Edmonton have. And we're hearing that others want to have a sheriff's detachment. So that's where we're going, is we're going to make sure that there's all kinds of options for those, especially those in rural Alberta, so that they're policed properly.
But not all municipalities are on board.
Well, look, I mean, if you ask Calgary and Edmonton, would you like to collapse your police service and go back to the RCMP? I'd be interested in knowing that answer. They'd probably say no. I'm asking the communities that are policed by the RCMP whether they're happy with the service they're getting. And if they're not, we're prepared to help them move to a municipal force, just like Calgary and Edmonton have, or to even set up a sheriff's detachment. So I'm not, if they want to keep their RCMP, they will. If they want to try something else, we'll support them in that.
Now, a lot to unpack in that clip, especially because Danielle Smith says people don't care whether or not it's an RCMP officer or a sheriff. I would like to take issue with that statement, because I think that people do very much care. I think that people know that there are different levels of policing that exist in the province of Alberta. I think that people know that there's a difference between a peace officer and a police officer. I think that people know that there's a significant difference in the training that a sheriff receives as opposed to the training that, say, a Calgary police officer receives, or that an Edmonton police officer receives, or that an RCMP police officer receives. I also would like to think that that Danielle Smith is aware of the fact that for municipalities that just decide to collapse their municipal police force, if they've already had RCMP, they don't get anywhere near the same financial support for putting together that police service. I would like to think that Danielle Smith is also aware that if the RCMP are having recruitment problems, what would you call it when Grand Prairie is currently offering a $5,000 cash incentive bonus to come up and be a police officer in Grand Prairie? Because that does not sound to me like an organization that isn't having any challenges with recruitment. But Danielle Smith didn't say any of those things. Danielle Smith also didn't answer the question that she was asked, as is the state of things on that particular radio show more often than not. She was asked why, what was the reason for the discrepancy? How come you're giving out wrong numbers? Now, it wasn't phrased that way. Probably should have been. But what's going on? How come the RCMP have this set of numbers, and how come you're telling the public a completely different set of numbers? And her response was, well, but they've got vacancies. And this is part of the problem that exists with that particular program, is it's not an environment where Danielle Smith is actually challenged on any of the things that she says. It's an environment that creates the illusion that she's being challenged on the things that she says. It creates the illusion that she's taking questions from either the host or the people of Alberta. Because more often than not, she doesn't answer the question that she's asked, and there's no opportunity for the person who asked that question to go, hey, but what about my actual question? Like, if you like the color blue, that's great. Fantastic color. But I wanted to know about policing. That was not the biggest piece, though, from that clip. The biggest piece from that clip, though, is the fact that she said she is going to be offering sheriff's detachments to municipalities instead of RCMP. And let's be really clear. No disrespect intended to any of the sheriffs who work in Alberta. You do good work. But it's not the same work that an RCMP officer does. And most of the sheriffs that I know, that I've spoken to, don't have any problem in saying, we're not the same thing as the RCMP. We're not the same thing as CPS. We're not the same thing as EPS. But apparently Danielle Smith is presenting a sheriff's detachment as an equivalent option to municipalities. And this should concern everybody, because we see lots of horrifying mistakes made by police officers across the province, across the country. And that is with the high level of training that they get. There's a lot of problems that exist in policing. There's no question about that. There's a lot of problems that exist in just about every social service, public service. There's no question about that. Institutional racism is absolutely a thing. And even with all of the training that's offered, the high-level training that's offered to organizations like the RCMP, to organizations like the Calgary Police Service, tragedy still happens. If you place the same responsibility in a lesser-trained individual, it only stands to reason that you're going to see more tragedy. And when we're talking about rural Alberta and some of the complexities that exist in rural Alberta policing, that should be a risk that no premier is willing to take, certainly not one that she's advocating for, but that's very clearly what Danielle Smith is doing there. Now, I could do a whole hour on this topic, because we have seen recent tragedies where horrifying mistakes have been made in policing, where people have lost their lives. And there's no question as we head into, again, we're recording this program on Sunday, September 29th. Tomorrow is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. There's no question that there are tremendously important conversations that need to happen in regards to how policing interacts with visible minorities, especially First Nations. There's no question that those conversations have to happen because we're not doing as anywhere near as good a job of it as we should be. But we're going to try to have some of those conversations, not tomorrow, because it shouldn't just be one day. These are issues that should be considered every day. We saw in Calgary last week, 2 weeks ago, a First Nations individual lose his life. And if you go to the Alberta government website where they talk about the ACERT investigation, he was not at any time told that he was being detained. He was not at any time told that he was under arrest. And because of decisions that were made, he lost his life. Doesn't just happen on the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. It happens every day. And so we're making a commitment heading into that. I know I'm going down a bit of a rabbit hole here, but we're making a commitment heading into that we're going to try to continue to have conversations about what needs to be done in the context of truth and reconciliation. Moving on from there, though, for now, remember how Adriana LaGrange said, I want to get this physician's pay thing sorted out. I really, really do. But there's these processes that I got to go through. They just slow it down. It turns out one of those processes that's slowing it down is pretty obviously the Premier's office.
This announcement, we deserve an answer. Anything other than a firm date is sound of silence. And I ask Albertans to contact their MLAs to support us, and they will listen to you. Okay, thank you for taking my call.
Thank you.
Well, look, I mean, we started off with nurse practitioners because we were finding that there are a lot of doctors who don't want to do family practice anymore, and there's a lot of doctors who want to decrease their patient load, and so we needed to create other alternatives. And we were pleased that we have so many nurse practitioners who want to start up practices, and pleased that then AMA prioritized figuring out a new deal with the doctors. Keep in mind, they're not our only employee group. We're in the middle of negotiations with United Nurses, with the AUPE, with HSAA, with all of the other employee groups. And so I recognize that it's frustrating, but we also have to be mindful that we have a lot of bargaining that our health ministry is doing at the moment. We'd hope to be able to get to the finish line. We found a bit of some glitches. Some of the clinics came forward and said that the stabilization payment that we gave directly to doctors didn't end up coming into the clinics to be able to stabilize the overhead, which is how it was intended. And so that's one thing we have to work out. I mean, there's not much point in trying to give a stabilization overhead support if it's not going to pay for overhead. So that was one of the things that we discovered in the last couple of months, that I need to make sure that we're getting the model right. Because a lot of the doctors, they even though many have private practices, many also work in a practice that is managed by a clinic owner. And so if we create a model that isn't going to help defray some of those overhead costs, we're going to still see clinics close down. So a little bit more work that we need to do. We are very close, but that was one of the other issues that we've got to address.
So no hard and fast date at this time?
Not at this time, but look, we've been out. Our doctors got a new negotiated agreement a couple of years ago, and it increased the amount that we pay on physician services from $5.7 billion to $6.7 billion. They've seen $1 billion increase in revenues in the last 2 years, and while that may be that it went to other types of physician services, and this was one of the neglected areas. I mean, they are our highest paid employee group. We have $31 billion worth of salaries that we pay, and 6.7 goes to doctors. So we have prioritized it, but we also have other employee groups that are also in the middle of negotiation, some without a contract since May. And we just ask for everyone to be patient. We have to go through that process to make sure everyone's treated fairly.
So there's no firm date, nothing concrete on when that new funding model that's been done is going to be coming forward. And it's interesting to note that Danielle Smith talks about the fact that the stabilization payment, which was money from the feds. That didn't make its way. So she's talking about an entirely different program than the physician's compensation, the family physician's compensation model that she's talking about here. Two totally different things. But she's trying to make it sound like they're the same thing because she doesn't want to roll the program out. That's the bottom line. And it's unfortunate because we also recently saw from the AMA statistics coming out saying that 58% of physicians are actively looking at ways to get out of the practice of family medicine. And again, this is one of those areas where it should be very, very clear what the problem is. People need to feel valued. They need to feel like their work matters, and they need to be paid appropriately. And if you don't do those things, especially in the extraordinarily competitive market that exists in Canada right now when it comes to healthcare providers, they'll go elsewhere. They'll go somewhere where they feel valued, or at least they'll go somewhere where they can get one of those things met. But where your province, your premier really got, quite frankly, tragic and horrifying was when the father of a trans child called in and asked the premier, why should I tell my kids that we should stay in this province?
Because I want some advice. And for a little context, my family, all born and raised in Alberta. I have 2 jobs. My wife has a successful business. My 2 kids are thriving in the province as a result of what I consider to be a good K-12 education. But I'm having trouble explaining to them why we should stay in this province, considering your proposed trans policy coming forward. I have a trans son and a gay son. You tell me why my family should stay in this province with that kind of legislation holding over our heads.
Well, look, I mean, we're supportive of having children decide who they want to be, but we also don't want to see kids making premature decisions that will result in sterilizing themselves at 10 years of age. So our policy is to make sure that kids get to a certain age where they understand the consequences of being on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and surgery. And so we've said that minors are going to not be permitted to do those until they're age 16. And then when they are age 16, they have to make sure that they've got the support of their families and psychologists and doctors to start the transition. We don't want to stop anyone from becoming who they're going to be, but we also don't want premature decisions being made before a child even understands what sex is or even understands what having babies means. I think that that's part of what we're trying to prevent.
Now, there's some particularly gross things happening in that clip. First of all, that is the parent of a child saying, you are creating a province that is becoming so toxic that I cannot in good conscience tell my kids that we should stay there, that this is a home for them. And Danielle Smith does not offer any sort of consolation. She doesn't offer any sort of, you know what, good for you. That must have been challenging. That must have been maybe not what you expected. And you're very, very clearly an invested parent. You're very, very clearly somebody who cares about their kids. You seem like the kind of person that every trans kid or every LGBTQ2S plus kid wishes and hopes for who they get as a parent. Well done, sir. She didn't say that. She immediately responds with unmitigated bullshit. And I'm going to call it that because it's a lie. The notion that we're just trying to prevent 10-year-old kids from sterilizing themselves is unmitigated garbage. At most, the most that a kid would have access to at 10 years old would be puberty blockers. That's the extent of it. At that age, most kids are just being supported with using the right pronouns for them, letting them dress in the clothes that they believe reflect who they are. But the most medical intervention that you're going to potentially see at 10 is maybe in consultation with the physician, you're going to see maybe puberty blockers. There is no bottom surgery done in Canada under the age of 18. Period. End of sentence. It is stunning that the Premier of Alberta is this comfortable lying and misleading people. Now, there is some conversation about, well, if somebody goes from puberty blockers directly to hormone replacement therapy, that can have some long-term impacts. And that's true in a subset of cases. No medical intervention of any kind comes without side effects. Some people experience those side effects more severely. But to say 10 years old, kids are sterilizing themselves at 10 years old is absolute garbage. It's harmful because there are people who hear the Premier of Alberta say that. There are people who hear the Premier of Alberta say, I'm just trying to make sure this thing that doesn't happen anywhere doesn't happen. It's absolutely ludicrous. It creates more stigma. It polarizes an already far too polarized conversation. And this is the kind of leadership that Danielle Smith brings to the table, all because she's leaning into policies to make sure that she protects herself at her AGM. And there's a lot of people who say, well, what's going on with all these Danielle Smith policies? What's happening here? And we're going to talk about that for a sec. But before we do, I want to talk about this article that was published in Nature magazine. For the record, Nature magazine is one of the highest standards of medical journal that exists. You can't just pay $500 to get your articles published in Nature magazine so you can say, I was published in a medical journal. It's not how it works. This article, titled State-Level Anti-Transgender Laws Increase Past-Year Suicide Attempts Among Transgender and Non-Binary Young People in the USA, took a look at the effect of what happens when legislators start saying, we're going to step into doctors' offices. We're going to create fearful, polarizing laws for things that, again, aren't happening because we know we can make people afraid. And afraid people will show up. Afraid people will come to your meetings. Afraid people will give you money. What's the effect on the actual kids that these people are claiming to try to protect? Up to a 72% higher suicide rate. Now, that's ignoring the fact that transgender youth, LGBTQ plus youth, have a way higher rate of suicide to begin with. They're more vulnerable than other kids to begin with. That's ignoring that fact. This is the effect of legislators saying, hey, you know what? We're going to weigh in here. Up to 72% higher. And this is the fundamental question that Danielle Smith and all of the people who lean into this anti-trans, anti-medicine, anti-science rhetoric should be asking themselves. When the experts are saying that when you introduce laws like this, you're taking an already vulnerable group and you're increasing their suicide rate by up to 72%, how can you look at yourself in the mirror and say to yourself, I'm doing it for the kids? Because you're not. If you were, you wouldn't be doing this. Now, there have been a lot of questions about Danielle Smith's political choices. And there are some political choices, like the anti-trans legislation, that are very, very clearly a result of the base weighing in. The result of the worst of Alberta, quite frankly, when it comes to policies, not people, But when it comes to the beliefs that some people hold, the worst of those beliefs making their way through policy conventions, Danielle Smith's trying to save her butt as she heads into her leadership review, as she heads into her premiership potentially being on the line. Some of her policies are very clearly that. But one of the fascinating things that occurred this week is we were talking about some of the policies that Danielle Smith has rolled out, and we referenced something called the Free Alberta Strategy. And there were a lot of people in our socials who didn't know what the Free Alberta Strategy actually is. And so we figured it would probably make some sense to do a quick little review before we got into the last thing that we want to talk about, which is the UCP AGM. And that has to do is what's the backstory on the Free Alberta Strategy. This is the literal cover. Pointing in backwards is hard. This is the literal cover for the Free Alberta Strategy. And if you look, you might recognize some of the names because Derek Frome was Danielle Smith's lawyer during the whole controversy with her GoFundMe, where she raised a bunch of money to sue the federal government, but then didn't and donated it all to the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, and got herself presumably a $100,000 tax receipt, which I imagine goes. That must be very, very nice when you're getting your federal taxes back. He was her lawyer who was speaking to those issues during her leadership race. But if we take a look at the name on the top there, oh, that's a familiar one. That is Rob Anderson. Rob Anderson, who was a PCMLA and then a Wild Rose MLA and then a PCMLA, and then he wasn't an MLA, and then he had a little internet show for a little while, and now he is the executive director of the Premier's office. Yeah, that Rob Anderson. That's the name on the top there. And when we take a look at what the Free Alberta Strategy is and what its goals are, it's very, very clear that it's the playbook that's being used to determine how Danielle Smith governs. And let's be clear, at the end of the day, it is a separatist playbook. I'm just going to say that part out loud because I think it's something that more and more people need to hear. The policy goals that Danielle Smith is implementing are based around a roadmap that ends at, if we don't get what we want, we're just going to leave. Don't believe me? Let's take a look together because we can go right to the table of contents for the Free Alberta Strategy, and the website's still up. This is not conspiracy theory. This is not inside baseball. This is the thing that happens. With the Free Alberta Strategy, we're talking about provincial sovereignty. Here's the goals. The Alberta Sovereignty Act. Does that sound familiar to you? Grants the Alberta legislature absolute discretion to refuse to enforce any piece of federal legislation or judicial decision that intrudes on Alberta's provincial rights or that unfairly attack the interests of Alberta's people. We saw how that was introduced almost word for word with what we have there. And then all of the lawyers went, that's not how any of the laws work. Fascinating, again, that this document was written by Rob Anderson, who is allegedly a lawyer. The Alberta Sovereignty Act went through some permutations. Oh, look, we've got the creation of the Alberta Provincial Police Force, which is literally what Danielle Smith has called the sheriffs. She said it in a scrum at the municipalities event, and then she's also said it in clips, as you heard today. People want a sheriff's detachment, they can get a sheriff's detachment. We've got the Alberta Independent Banking Act. We've got the Alberta Judicial Independence Act. We have Equalization, Termination, and Tax Collection Act. We have creating an Alberta pension plan. And then we have establishing Alberta unemployment insurance. These are all of the steps that the Free Alberta Strategy sets out before it very, very clearly says, if that doesn't work, well, then I guess we're just going to have to take our ball and we'll form the Western Canada Republic. This is the playbook that the Premier of Alberta is clearly currently working from. You should go check it out. Just Google it. Free Alberta Strategy. You can throw in Rob Anderson's name if you want. It's a real thing. This is where we are. Which brings us to our last topic, which is the UCP AGM. If you were here last week, you will remember that we talked about this. And what this was is an email that we had received where somebody had applied. They'd purchased their UCP membership because they wanted to go vote at the UCP AGM. And they got a response from Dustin Van Voot, who is the executive director of the UCP. Dear so-and-so, it has come to our attention that you recently purchased a membership in the United Conservative Party of Alberta. Welcome. Well, welcoming all Albertans who share our principles and goals, we would be remiss in asking if this purchase has been made due to a change of heart. Elections Alberta shows that you donated to the NDP in the past, and your social media is replete with commentary and in opposition to the UCP. A requirement of being a member of the UCP is to support the principles of the association. Your previous support of the NDP does not seem to indicate you have met this requirement. Could you please respond to this email indicating your support for the party, or we will be forced to consider all other contrary evidence in maintaining a current membership. So if you listened to last week's show, you'll remember that we said, hey, you know, it might be fun. You should go buy memberships. If they're going through Elections Alberta and looking for who's donated to whom in the past, this might be a fun way to make them do some legwork for $10. And worst case scenario, you get kicked out, you get your $10 back. Best case scenario, you get to stay in, you get to buy an early bird ticket to the UCP AGM, and you maybe get to send Danny a message. Everybody wins, except for Dustin. Not to be hypocrites, and we'll get to that in a sec. There were some folks who took that to heart. One of them, and this is where it's so. The facade just drops away as to what the UCP has become. Because one of the people who bought a membership was none other than former Conservative Deputy Premier, Minister of, I think, just about everything. I mean, he was in government for years and years and years, multiple terms. He was, like I said, Deputy Premier, Minister of Education, Minister of Employment, Minister of Innovation. Like, there's a whole list of things that Thomas Lukaszuk has done. He has been critical of the direction that Danielle Smith has taken the UCP. But that does not mean he's not a conservative, because it's important to highlight, and there's going to be some people who get angry. I'm going to get some DMs on this. That's okay. It's important to highlight that conservative means a bunch of different things. It used to, at least. It used to mean a bunch of different things. You could be a progressive conservative. You could be somebody who believed in, hey, we've got to be responsible with the finances, and maybe we should also, treat people like human beings and be socially progressive. That's literally where the progressive conservative name came from. And when most Albertans associate what it means to be a conservative, that's what they think of. I want to be good with my money, but I also don't want to be a dick. That's not what it means to be a conservative, according to, apparently, the UCP. Because while Thomas Lukaszuk has been doing a very active role at some cost to himself, it's important to highlight that in saying, hey, this thing that's being passed off as conservatism right now, this doesn't represent me. I believe that if we're going to say United Conservative Party, which was a reminder, a merger of the Progressive Conservatives and the Wild Rose, then there should be progressive conservative elements in that party. And if you're not going to do that, then I have to speak out in opposition of that. It doesn't mean he's not a conservative. It just means he's not that kind of conservative. Well, Thomas bought himself a membership. Thomas got a reply. Dear Mr. Lukaszuk, it's come to our attention that you recently purchased a membership in the United Conservative Party of Alberta. Well, we welcome all Albertans who share our values. Your record clearly shows otherwise. Billing Albertans taxpayers for $20,000 cell phone expenses, just one example of your disregard for Albertans. Now, that's a super low shot, because anybody who knows the backstory, the actual backstory on that cell phone bill, which has never really been made public, and it's not my place to do so, that's a whole separate thing. It's also worth noting that he was cleared by the ethics commissioner on that one of the day, not the new one. It's no surprise that you've backed the NDP in the last 2 elections, a party that shares your reckless approach to spending. Ironically, even the NDP, your chosen party, have shown no hesitation in removing members when it suits them. During their leadership contest, they investigated 360 members, denying many simply for voicing criticism on social media. If they can purge members for such minor infractions, you can certainly understand why somebody as egregious as you would be denied membership in the UCP to uphold our standards. Now, that's a fascinating paragraph. It's a really interesting paragraph, because the argument is, the NDP, they went through, they found members, and they denied them simply because they voiced criticism. So gross. We're going to do it too, though. Goes on to say, under Section 2.1, moreover, the NDP was caught by the elections commissioner issuing memberships to people who never requested them, inflating the numbers and making a mockery of the NDP leadership process. Apparently, that's a standard practice for the party you align with. Under Section 2.1 of the UCP bylaws, our objective is to build a party that forms government, represents Albertans who believe in personal responsibility, fiscal accountability, you will no longer, therefore, effective immediately, your UCP membership is revoked. You will no longer enjoy any membership privileges, including serving on our boards, attending events, or voting at our AGM. This should come as no surprise given your lack of alignment with UCP values. They really only want the people who align with their values, you see. If you wish to appeal, you may apply to the party's board of directors in 48 hours. So that's pretty wild. Because to say, hey, not just you're not a conservative, you're not our kind of conservative, when there's only one conservative party in the province of Alberta anymore. You don't get to be a part of the club because you tried to hold us to account. And so we're going to do the exact same very, very, very dirty things that the NDP did, is a fascinating argument. Almost seems petty, some might say. But see, I'm not a hypocrite. I don't believe in being a hypocrite. I think if you're going to say that you're going to do something, you're going to advocate for something, you should do it yourself. So after last week's show, I went ahead and I bought myself a membership as well. And it turns out, in a shocking turn of events, I appear to be quite well known to the UCP, which is wild because I've invited them to come on the show so many times and they just keep saying no, except for Leela. But the rest of them just keep saying no. I got a personalized email from Dustin myself. Dear Nate, let's be clear. You're not a conservative and your electoral history proves it. You ran against the UCP in 2019. It's true. I ran with the Alberta Party and barely managed 10.6% of the vote. When you tried for city council, you did even worse, scraping together just 7.29%. And then it does like a whole, Premier Smith is just the bestest. The UCP is the hardest working party. Your support for the NDP, a party that opposes everything we stand for, shows you don't align with our values. Buying a UCP membership doesn't change that. It only highlights how far you are from what this party represents. Pursuant to Section 2.1 of the bylaws, and then they long story short, they evoked my membership. Therefore, UCP membership is revoked, effective immediately. Given the way you treat party membership, it's clear the NDP is a better fit for you. They made a complete farce out of their own leadership membership process by inflating the numbers and issuing memberships to people who never even requested them. Cough UCP leadership race with Jason Kenney. Cough. As a reminder, even your own NDP has had no hesitation in kicking people out when it suits them. Earlier this year, their executive director, Garrett Spellacy, admitted that over 360 who purchased memberships were flagged for investigation during their leadership contest, many of whom were removed. If the NDP can enforce their rules, surely you understand why the UCP does the same. If you wish to appeal this decision, you can. So much to unpack there, but let's have some fun with it, shall we? So first of all, you know who else ran for the Alberta Party? Rick Fraser, who is a progressive conservative. You know who else ran for the Alberta Party? Stephen Mandel, who is a progressive conservative minister. You know who got kicked out of the Alberta Party for criticizing them? This guy. Yeah, we did. For anyone who's unfamiliar, I had my Alberta Party membership revoked because the show, in a sketch that I wasn't even part of, interviewed the empty chair of the Alberta Party leader because they didn't have a leader after Stephen Mandel stepped down for, I don't know, it was like 6 years, maybe 6 months. Doesn't matter. The Alberta Party revoked my membership because the show that I host did a sketch about the Alberta Party that I wasn't even in. What is it that makes all these political parties so snowflakey? For the record, a quick perusal of my social media will show very clearly that I've said some things about the NDP as well. And I've said some things about the NDP on this show. The show has taken some pretty hard stances on some of the things that the NDP has done because we just believe in holding people in positions of power to account, regardless of what their political affiliation is. There shouldn't be anything wrong with that. And any organization that actively goes out of its way to remove voices of dissent is doing itself a disservice. Because if you don't have somebody in the room who's comfortable telling you you're wrong when you're wrong, you are setting not only yourself up for failure, but everybody that you purport to represent. Opposing voices should be welcomed. But it's fascinating that Mr. Van Vogt says, you lost an election, therefore that shows your political your electoral history, because we don't have to look very far in Alberta politics to see that Danielle Smith has in fact lost a race of her own. After she crossed the floor from the Wild Rose to the PCs, she couldn't even get through her nomination race, let alone to the actual election. But the part that I want to talk about in particular is the values piece. Because the notion that if you besmirch, if you do something that could bring embarrassment to the party is disqualifying. I don't actually have a problem with that in the absence of rank hypocrisy. I don't think Thomas, not speaking for him, but he put some posts up. I don't think Thomas has a problem with that principle in the absence of rank hypocrisy. But there's a lot of hypocrisy going on here. And maybe before we get to the hypocrisy part, maybe we should go back in time, compliments of my favorite Twitter account, Disordered YYC, and see what the now leadership of the UCP thought about disqualifying members in the UCP leadership race.
I mean, I just saw, we were just talking off air about a story that just surfaced where he was asked, where he was expressing concern about all of these new angry Albertans that were buying UCP memberships and coming to the conference or the AGM, the special AGM, to vote probably against him to get him out and have a new leader selected. And he started, he's saying, these are angry people that just want to voice their displeasure with COVID policies, et cetera. It almost sounded like he was saying this is a small fringe minority with unacceptable views. And that's the thing, is that when you start attacking your own, because I guarantee the people coming to this special AGM are conservatives. These are conservative Albertans. They've probably been members of the party at some time in the past. And if they're not, it's because they're disgusted with the direction of the party was going, but they want to get back in and have a say. So he needs to take a look at this, and I would say do the right thing before April 9th and step down with honor.
Now, just for fun, if we're going to say somebody was once a conservative, they were once a member of the party, they want to come back to the party now, if we're going to make that argument, I'm almost tempted to run off to the side and grab one of my favorite props from the show's history, because in the run-up to Jason Kenney's leadership review, I bought a membership to the UCP. And in fact, that was the last membership I held. I voted in the UCP leadership race. I voted in Kenney's UCP leadership review. And I did that at the same time as I was using a literal puppet of Jason Kenney. This is the difference between Danielle Smith and Jason Kenney in a nutshell. I know Jason Kenney knew about the puppet. I heard from people who told me that Jason Kenney knew about the puppet. He did not have his executive director disqualify me for the one vote that I represented in his leadership review. He did not have his executive director disqualify me in the UCP leadership race. That was, say what you will about Jason Kenney, and there's a lot to be said. He did not have people removed from his party because he was afraid. So afraid of a dissenting voice. Danielle Smith clearly does. But hey, I was a member of the Alberta Party too. I guess if you've ever been a member of another political party, you have no business getting a UCP membership. Let's ask somebody who, I don't know, is high up in the UCP leadership chain what their thoughts are on somebody who's had a membership in another political party, maybe even an active one. Should they be able to buy a UCP membership?
Do is, if you are a WIPA supporter, participate in this process and try to get the leader who aligns as closely as possible with your views about where we need to go in pushing for greater autonomy. And if you're not successful, then I completely understand why you might want to stay with WIPA. But if you are successful, then we'll have the governing party pushing in the same direction of the things you want to achieve. So there's no loss in buying a $10 membership to do that. That would be my pitch back to you.
That's Danielle Smith when she was running for the UCP leadership, actively saying, hey, WIPA members, you're a totally different political party, but you should buy a UCP membership and vote for me. And if you don't like what happens, then you don't have to stay a member. That's totally cool, which only underscores the point. And maybe part of the biggest reason why I bought a membership, because I knew that we were going to see this hypocrisy. We've been getting emails from several people and DMs from multiple people who have had the same experience where apparently Dustin or his little band of flying monkeys has gone out into the world and gone through people's donation history and gone through people's social media to determine if they're worthy of being members of the UCP. I was pretty confident that that's what they were going to do, because that's what passes for conservatism these days. What calls itself conservatism in the United Conservative Party is not conservatism. It is not principled conservatism. It is the hypocritical pursuit of power. And in the next 3 minutes, I'm going to prove it. I say some mean things about some of the UCP's policies, and I call Danielle Smith a liar when she's lying. Here's what I haven't done. I haven't been convicted of a criminal offense where I was in effect participating in insurrection at the border. To my knowledge, neither has Thomas Lukasik. To my knowledge, none of the other people who have had their memberships revoked by Mr. Van Vogt have been convicted of criminal offenses, are awaiting their sentencing. None of those people have. One would think having somebody who had done those things would bring some disrepute to the party. But it's really worth highlighting. And this is where, we're going to go back and talk about Marco one more time. Because not only is Marco van Hugenbos a card-carrying member of the UCP, as he demonstrated in his tweet where he talked about how he was going to be attending the UCP AGM. He's since put up pictures of his receipt for the UCP AGM, but he's also gone a step further. He's posted pictures where he celebrated the fact that he is currently on the Constituency Association board for at least one constituency association that's not in the area that he lives. Marco van Hugenbos is on the Constituency Association board for Calgary Acadia. And there's people who suggest that Tyler Shando's departure from that board was precisely because Marco van Hugenbos got onto that board. Marco van Hugenbos, a convicted criminal awaiting sentencing. And this is not a convicted criminal for he drove fast. If anything, it's the opposite. He shut down the Alberta border, costing the Alberta economy hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. He remains a card-carrying member of the UCP on one of their constituency association boards and will be attending the UCP AGM. He has been invited to appear and has been introduced in the legislature. I think he's been introduced in the legislature. He definitely took a bunch of pictures because he was a guest there. A guest of this government, no less. And that is where conservative values are in this province now. And if you want to see how embarrassingly bad it is that the people in positions of leadership, we had a fun little exchange with Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson, the Relay Consortium employee. I don't know if she's an employee. She's under their banner. Senator-elect and former UCP president, Erica Barudis, because she decided to come on to our social media and say, hey, you know what? Thomas Lukaszuk, he said bad things about the UCP, so it's totally reasonable that he got kicked out. And we asked Erica in that exchange a simple question. Do you think it's okay that a convicted criminal who is involved in a border blockade that cost the Alberta hundreds of millions of dollars, do you think it's okay that he's a member still? Do you think it's okay that he's on the board? She just didn't answer. She didn't have the conviction, the moral fortitude, the leadership. I don't know what it is that's missing in this current crew. She didn't have whatever it takes to just say, yeah, you know what? I don't actually have any control over who gets to be a member and who doesn't. That's a Danny and Dustin thing. But no, I'm not cool with that. She couldn't even bring herself to say that because the United Conservative Party in its current incarnation is about nothing more than the pursuit of power and personal enrichment. And that's it. Period. And if you want to talk about Mr. Lukaszuk's political pedigree, you should probably ask him. But when it comes to my personal political pedigree, my family has been involved in politics in the province of Alberta for literally a century. Both of my grandparents, my grandfathers, were very active in politics, and they were the very definition of a progressive conservative. I have no doubts at all that both of them would be absolutely horrified at the state of what is currently being passed off for conservatism in this province. It is a piss poor counterfeit, nothing else. Because the values that both of my grandfathers, one in rural Alberta, one in urban Alberta, believed in, above all else, were honesty and not being afraid to speak the truth and hold people in positions of power to account. And if this whole exercise has demonstrated nothing else, it is that there is nobody in the positions of power in the UCP who have either the inclination or the ability or the strength of character to point out the fact that their leadership has abandoned those principles of integrity and honesty and working for the people that they're supposed to represent. Somehow, the current incarnation of the UCP has managed to take on the very worst elements of the progressive conservatives and the very worst elements of the Wild Rose. And I want to be really clear. I'm not saying that everybody in the Progressive Conservative Party was bad, because then I'd be talking about my grandfather. And I'm not saying that everybody in the Wild Rose was bad, because I do not believe that that is true. But there's no question. The simple fact that Marco's membership persists. Thomas Lukasic's was revoked. Mine was revoked. Countless others were revoked. That's proof this is not a conservative party. And for every conservative who put time and energy and volunteering, I'm not even talking about the leadership, I'm talking about the grassroots of every conservative party that believed in those values of honesty and integrity and speaking truth to power, they should feel simultaneously horrified and betrayed by what this monster has mutated into. And it is, quite frankly, embarrassing. And a lot of people are like, oh, Nate, you're picking on Erica. That's no fair. No, I don't think that's the case at all, because Erica has chosen to continue to hold herself up as a pundit. She's continued to hold herself up as a conservative voice that should be listened to. But when confronted with her own rank hypocrisy, she suddenly falls mute. And that is the problem that exists in the UCP right now. And to really put a fine point on this, what I find absolutely wild, truly mind-blowing, is the number of people that I have heard from in the last couple of days since all of this went public who would be considered part of the fringe minority, the far righty right, who have reached out and who have said, yeah, that's some bullshit. I don't like you. I disagree with most of what you say, but that is not how we're supposed to roll. I disagree with this, has been stunning. But the Erica Barudis of the world, they're silent. Which is all to say, if you want to mess with Dustin, you should spend the $10, because I can say you do get your $10 back. If they revoke your leadership, you do get your $10 back, because I got mine back like yesterday. So, you spend the $10. If they revoke it, you get the $10 back. You get to make Dustin have to do a bunch of legwork for a while. So that's fun. And if you spend the $10 in the next few days and they don't kick you out, then you can buy a ticket to the AGM and send Danielle Smith and all of these hacks who are passing their personal pursuit of power and personal enrichment off as conservatism, because they have a cynical enough view of Albertans that they believe most Albertans will fall for it. You can send them a message. Before we wrap it up, I got to do the plugs. Because we're well past the 2-hour mark. So I promise next week we have no interview episode this week, so there will be no interview episode on Wednesday, but we do have a couple more lined up that I'm really looking forward to. And next week, if the right people haven't picked things up and started to run with them, then we absolutely will be going further down the Skybox scandal rabbit hole, and we'll be taking a closer look at, in particular, two key figures and what their relationships to each other are, because they very much do have relationships, and it very much does go to how this government is absolutely for sale, and the goal is to put it all together as one big package at the end of the things and the stuffs. But all of that being said, we got to do the bill paying stuff. So we do still have our merch that's up for sale. The link is fixed and in the show notes. So if you're listening to this on the podcast version, or if you're watching this on the YouTubes and then you come back in the YouTube notes in like 2 hours when we get the notes in, the link is there. You can buy the hoodies, you can buy the mugs, you can get the t-shirts, and you can get the toques. It is getting colder out there. I put a jacket on today. It was delightful. I'm a big jacket person. But all of that stuff is now available, continues to be available at abpoly.ca at the link in the description as well. If you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown and you'd like to help us, then you can support us in a couple of different ways. One of them is you can sign up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where you can really set the amount that you want to sign up for every month, and you can give us a little bit of money every month. That helps us to buy the things and the stuff and the toys and pay for all of the bills to keep the lights on and the internet things doing the internet things. But if you're not into long-term relationships, you're looking for something a little bit more transient, then you can also absolutely send us an e-transfer at info@thebreakdownab.ca, where you can still set the amount. And if we get, times are tough right now as well. So if you're not able to support us in a financial way, smash that like and subscribe button, as the kids say, because that absolutely helps us get in front of more eyes and ears and all of that good stuff as well. I think that's everything. I think I covered it all off. So all of that being said, it was a bit of a heavier show. So I want to do my thing. I'm bringing it back because Alberta politics is just such an unmitigated dumpster fire. And this is how I get my little dopamine correction at the end of the show. And I'm just going to keep doing it.
I tend to be pretty trusting.
It never gets old. It's every time I watch it, there's something new. The double nod, the two nods, love that every time. But the eyebrows also are just so good. You can't simulate that. We're going to be back next Sunday with another show. Like I said, we're going to be talking about a bunch of different things. And if the good folks of the journalism world haven't gotten a little bit farther down the rabbit hole of the Skybox scandal, we absolutely are going to go spelunking. So in the meantime, and in between time, looks like it's going to be another busy week in Alberta politics as we head into the AGM. Seriously, the $10 to make Dustin do the work, so worth it. And if you were able to get through, I know that there are a lot of people, and I just want to, before I wrap up, I want to give some props anonymously, because as much as having the UCP do exactly what I thought they were going to do and revoke my membership, as much as having that has given me like 45 minutes of material to play with, there have been a lot of people who recognize what I was trying to say with that, which is they will identify the people that they believe are threats, and they will try to keep us from being involved and silence us. I'm pretty happy to be in a club with Thomas. They will do that. But the number of people that have reached out and said, you know what, this is not acceptable. We're going down a road that I don't want to go down, and I'm not going to let, myself, my kids, my family, my grandkids go down this road. The number of people who bought memberships and bought tickets to the UCP AGM so they can send Danielle Smith a message has been absolutely inspiring. This is how democracy works. People have to be engaged. People have to do the things. So to everybody who has done those things, who have the means to do them, important point, you guys are awesome. So all of that being said, that's it for this week. Make sure you come up for every once in a while, but keep the fight going. And as always, keep the conversation going.